All right. First of all, good evening to everybody that is here and everybody that is not here. Um, Bezat Hashem, today we're going to continue with Sipurey Maasios, the story of the exchange children. Uh, Today, however, I have a surprise for you, and the surprise is that the Sipurey Maasios, the text that I will share with you, is already in English. I believe this is um, Rabbi Kaplan's translation. I'm not sure, but this I won't have to inflict my um, horrendous transliterating upon you. So let's just share the screen, and here we go. Okay. Good evening, Chaim. So we basically have found the king's true son chasing the beasts in the forest, and whenever night falls, he's going up the tree, and then in the morning he finds them standing nearby, and he keeps on chasing them. And we said that just before he meets the men of the forest, he goes up on a tree and he meets a man who is the man on the horse, who is really the true son of the slave. They meet on top of the tree. And it is then when they meet on top of the tree that he hears for the first time the roar of the animals and then the laughter that goes all over the world. He didn't hear it before he met the man on the horse. And the man on the horse told, and then just before daybreak, um, it becomes before daybreak, there's huge laughter all over reality, all over the forest. And the man of the forest says, and I'm not afraid of that anymore. I mean, the real prince is very scared because he says this is not normal. I mean, you don't have, surround sound laughter all over reality. This must be the place, of the demons. And then the day dawns, and this one sees the beast, this one sees the horse, and they separate. And when they separate, uh, two things happened. First of all, he found a sack with bread, and he took the sack on his shoulders and went after the beasts. And afterwards, he encounters a man. Initially, he was afraid. However, still he had a little relief because he had found a person. So that man asked him, "How did you get here?" And he, the true prince, asked the man in return, "How did you get here?" And the other man answered him, "I, with the expression of amazement, my parents and my parents' were raised here. But you, how did you come here? For no man whatsoever comes here from the settled areas." And now he, the real prince, was very frightened, for he understood this is not a human being at all. For he's saying his ancestors were raised here, and no man from civilization comes here at all. So he understood that this is no human at all, but he's still, the man of the forest, did not do him any harm whatsoever, and he was welcoming him. And then the men of the forest asked him, "What are you doing here?" And he answered, he was chasing the beasts. And the man of the forest told him, "Stop chasing after your sins already. These are not beasts at all, but these are your sins that are leading you like that. Enough already. You've already received yours. In other words, your punishment. Stop chasing them anymore. Come with me and you will arrive to the thing that is fitting for you." And he went with him and was ready to speak to him, to ask him anything, because, he thought that maybe he will swallow him up because it's not a human being at all. Meantime, he encounters his friend again, the man who was chasing after the horse. We've been through this quite at length about what all those things allude to, at least to my meager understanding. And as soon as he saw him, immediately, so obviously, he says he winked at him. I don't know. He actually signaled him. He said, "This is not a human being at all. Don't have any dealings with him whatsoever, because he's not a human." And while he was doing it, his friend and the man on the horse took a look and he saw a sack with bread and he started to appeal to him. "My brother, I've not eaten in days. Give me bread." And he said, "Here in the wilderness, nothing helps. My life takes priority. The bread, I need the bread for my sake." And he started begging him, beseech him greatly. He says, "I'll give you anything." "What can you give me?" He says, "I'll sell myself to you as a slave." And we said that for that, it was worthwhile. And he bought him, he gave him bread, and he bought him for a slave, as a slave. The way that we have explained who the true son of the king is, he is the neshama. The true son of the slave is the two pretenders to the throne, which is the body and the ego. And they combine with them the self-esteem and the self-image and the history of every person. What we mentioned was that in the very beginning of the story, there's an altercation between them. Who is going to rule the roost? Who will be considered the king, and who will be the slave? And it is the son of the slave who actually becomes king. We went through the entire story until we got to the point where the prince has taken on the job of shepherding the beasts. Now, before that, he lived life of looseness, harlotry, and basically of self-pity. And he was directed from Shemayim, if you actually want to get to what's coming to you, in other words, to reclaim your royal stature, to reclaim your dominion, as you well should, the first thing that you need to do is you need to accept upon yourself the yoke of a job, of menial labor. Accept responsibility. Accept responsibility of leading the beasts. Accept the authority of his boss, the merchant, that treats him very roughly. And he gets to the forest, and two beasts run into the forest. And we already mentioned that this is when he gets into the middle of the forest, when he can no longer see his friends, since he's so scared of his boss. And Rabbeinu says he's being paranoid. This is not a normal state of mind. This is not, presence of mind. He comes to the conclusion that he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. If he goes back to the merchant, he's going to get killed. And if he chases the animals, the beast and the animals of the forest will eat him up alive. And he decides to continue to chase the beasts. We mentioned that this is a cardinal decision in his life. This is a decision that ultimately leads him to reclaiming his throne, his true greatness. And we asked, why is this the correct decision? When you take a look at it, it's an insane decision. You can negotiate with your boss. You can't negotiate it with wild animals in the forest. The only reason that it is a 50-50 proposition for him is because he's paranoid. And therefore he has free choice to move ahead, to continue to chase the animals, or to go back to the merchant. And we said that the reason why this was the correct decision, why this was a liberating decision, is because going after the animals, being that, the odds are the same, going after the animals means doing your job, accepting your tasks, and going ahead with it and sticking with it. And going back is finding a reason why you couldn't do it. And we mentioned it many times already, that the most important lesson in this thing is that your mental defects, your incapacities, are there by design. Had he been a normal human being, he would have to go back to the merchant. He couldn't possibly go ahead. It's insane. But because he's paranoid, he has the choice to go ahead and he can make that right decision. Which means that the reason why I am the way I am is a tool in my hands to reach my perfection. It's a totally new outlook on life. Instead of saying, I'm a victim of my story, I'm a victim of my history, and being busy reconciling things, trying to reconcile things, trying to put the pieces back together, and grumbling and rebelling and whatever it is, that the person does when he and his history, he and his body and ego and story and his neshama are all meshed together. Now he's separating. He sees them as separate. This is when he meets that man of the horse, which is the body, which is the true son of the slave. It's the first time that he is able to recognize that I am me and my story, which I always figured to be who I was, is just that. It's just a story. And when you recognize, when you're able to sort of like push away and take a look and see your story, who you are, your pluses, your minuses, your history, your injuries, your capacities, your incapacities, everything is tools that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you. You're seeing things in a totally different perspective. This is when he meets the man of the horse on top of the tree. That's the reason why they make a pact at that point in time to always remain together. They're no longer fighting one another. It's no longer an altercation. It's a coexistence. And the first thing that happens is when the minute the time gets good, the sun rises, the body goes after the things that interest him. That's the horse. The horse, the Gemara says that the horse signifies pride, uh, fighting, uh, looseness, immorality. And the beasts, which are kosher animals, represent working, responsibility. Once they separate, in other words, he realizes that I am not my story. I am not my pluses and I'm not my minuses. All these come to serve me. I'm somebody completely different. That A, he's able to find a sack with bread, and B, he's able to meet the men of the forest. The sack with bread is that Rabbeinu says in quite a few places that parnasa, the lack of sustenance of parnasa, is a result of a lack of das. I mean, on the other hand, the Gemara says, intelligence does not assure anybody of parnasa. So, which is it? The answer is not, this is not the kind of das we are talking about. The das that we are referring to is when you know you're not living under the dominion of your story, of somebody moved my cheese, and they wronged me this way, and they wronged me that way, and they wronged me this way, and they did this to me, and they do this to me, and they keep on doing this. When you no longer live from that, when you have an open das and you realize it's you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, everything is possible. Because the thing that actually makes a person poor is a poor man's mindset. That's what the Gemara says. En anius ela min hadas. Poverty is only from the das, from the mind. Ve'en ashiras ela min hadas. And wealth comes from the mind. When a person has the das of a poor person, he's poor. And if he has money, the money will leave him. He will make sure that the money leaves him, because having money doesn't fit his das. You can see that when people win the lottery, within a year they become balechayvas. They huge debts. They don't have the mental and emotional vessels with which to handle. They have a das of a poor person. The reason why my life is the way it is because subconsciously that's exactly the way I want my life to be. We said it many times. It's not the way I would have liked to want my life to be. I want to live in a palace. I don't know what. Each one according to his demyonis are. But what I really want, whether I like it or not, is reflected in my reality. When you separate that das, how can you separate from that das of 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 your story, as it were? How can you separate it? By default, you operate from it. You react from it. How can you separate from it? The only way that you can separate yourself from your story is by recognizing that you are acting from your story, that it's a story. It's not who I am, and you can't even begin to imagine how awful my life was. Where this happened to me, that happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me, this did to me, this, that to me, whatever it is. It's only when I recognize, no, this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did with me and for me. And if I look at it this way, I'm no longer bound to react out of those preconditioning. I'm free. So the first decision that the true prince makes after he separates from the man or the horse, first of all, he's going in a different direction. I'm into avodas Hashem. I don't care about the body. I don't care about my story. I don't care about anything else. This is the separation between them is very much like the separation between, when a kid becomes a teenager and he rebels against his parents. Until then, the child and the parents were enmeshed together. They're all like one and the same, as the Gemara calls Bra Kara de Avua. The son is the leg of his father, almost like an extension of his parents. But at a certain point in time, the child needs to gain his or her own personality, to establish his own person. In order to do that, he or she needs to rebel. They need to separate. They need to break away. This is the breaking away that he breaks from the man on the horse. Once the separation is done, once he's establishing himself as his own man, as it were, they can meet together again. The same thing in your own quest for self-manifestation. You need to separate yourself from the conditions, from your story, from your attributes. And then you find the bread, then you find Torah, then you find the truth, then you find sustenance, then you find excitement, and then comes the body, and the body says, "Let me have bread. Haven't eaten in days." And we said, in the context of the story, that sounds ridiculous. We didn't hear before that the man of the horse was crawling, eating grass, because he hasn't eaten in days. So obviously, we're not talking about physical eating. The man of the horse says, "Man, I haven't been excited for a long time. I'm bored." The body wants its enjoyments. The body wants what feels good. The ego wants what looks good. Give me some bread. He says, no way. I need it for myself. What is the myself that I need the bread for? The myself that I need the bread for is the neshama, which means to do what is the right thing to do. The body wants to do what it wants to do. The ego wants to do what it wants to do. The neshama wants to do the right thing. I'm sorry, I cannot spend bread. I cannot spend life force to keep you entertained. There's not enough time for it. Life is too short for that. So the man that first begs him, "I'll do anything for you." So what can you do for me? What can you give me in the wilderness? What can you give me when, the clock is ticking, life is ticking? What can you give me? And the man on the horse says, "I'm going to be your slave. I'm going to serve you." And at that point, he says, that makes sense. Until now, before we were enmeshed, I didn't know where my body and ego and my neshama began and ended. Then we met again. First of all, we were in confrontation. Who's going to be on top? Then we separated. Then we met again. And now we're making a pact. Then we separate again. He finds the bread and they meet again. And now the packing order is being set. Who is the master and who is the slave? And this is a very important point. The reason why he's willing to share the bread with the man on the horse, with his slave, is because it's not just that, the way that I am and my attributes and my history and whatever that happened to me are right because the Kodesh Baruch Hu is always right. It's not just that. It's the beginning. Saying that is the beginning of being able to separate from it and seeing it as something different than what you really are. But the next stage is coming together with it. Rabbeinu says that the neshama has to let the body know at all times from the tremendous attainments and asagas that the neshama is able to perceive. This is only possible when the body is clean, when the body is purified, when the body becomes subservient to the soul, which means when what I do with my body or what I do with my ego is subservient to what it is that I need to do in life. That's why Rabbeinu says that on Teravav that the crux of tshuva, the main nekuda of tshuva, is yishma bizyoino yidam v'yishtek. The person should hear his shame and keep quiet. What it means is that you're using your ego and you're subjugating it to the principle of what's right to do. You hear the humiliation and you keep quiet. The natural response of the ego would be, hey, who the heck do you think you are? What are you doing? What am I, chopped liver? When, Yishma Bizir, to hear one's shame, one's humiliation, whether it comes from without or from within, it doesn't matter. This means that your body and your ego and your story have become the slave to your neshama. It's not in vain that the Kadosh Baruch Hu has put your neshama with this body and to those parents with these physical, mental, emotional attributes. It's all tailor-made precision, as precise as the subatomic powers, forces that keep the electrons going around the nucleus, not coming any closer and not going any further, which enables reality to exist. And now, let's take a look at the story once again. And the both of them went together and followed the man of the forest. The slave walked behind him. That is, the horseman who sold himself as a slave followed after the herdsman, for he was already his slave, and the two of them walked after the man of the forest. And here is the new relationship between the neshama and the body and the ego. And meanwhile, now it became a bit easier for him since he has a servant already. When he needed to lift up some object or do something else, he ordered his slave to lift it or do something. This is the point where Avodas Hashem, the body and the ego join the neshama in serving Kodesh Baruch Hu. And now they're coming into a new reality. So they followed together behind the man of the forest. And they came to a place where there were snakes and scorpions. He, meaning the real prince, grew very terrified. And a kind of fear, he asked the man of the forest. In other words, he got his guts up. How will we get past here? And he, the man of the forest, answered him, Elamai, meaning, is that too a wonder? There's a much bigger wonder. How will you enter my house? And he showed him his house standing in the air. They went with him, and he brought them over in peace, and he brought them into his house and gave them things to eat and drink and went away. This is the meaning between the men and the tzaddik. Last time when we spoke, I believe it was on Thursday we mentioned it. I'm not sure. Maybe Motzei Shabbos. We spoke about how the Rambam explains how he agrees with Aristotle. In 25 of the 26 principles of the Aristotelian philosophy, and disagrees on the 26th. The 26th principle, according to the way the Rambam codifies the Aristotelian philosophy, is that the world always existed. And the Rambam gives a fabulous mashal to how can you agree with all 25 logical procession, which all lead to the 26, and in the 26 you disagree. The Rambam says, basically, he gives a mashal, we mentioned this, that it's like a child that grows alone on an island. He has never seen a woman. He has never had a family. He only knows life the way he knows he experienced them. And somebody comes to tells him, there is an existence for human being in which you don't breathe, you don't eat, you don't drink, and you don't take out any waste. You don't move any waste. And the boy will obviously say, or the man will obviously say, I mean, you're being ridiculous. If you don't breathe for 2-3 minutes, you're dead. You don't drink for 2-3 days, you're dead. You don't eat for a week or whatever it is, you're dead. If you don't let out the waste matter from your body, I mean, sooner or later it toxifies you and you're dead. But of course, we're talking about the embryonic stage. When a person is an embryo, he doesn't breathe, he doesn't eat, he doesn't drink, and no waste comes out. But the boy in the island has no way of grasping that because it is outside his realm of experience. The Rambam explains there is a point of entropy beyond which your experience and your mind and the way that you understand things come to an end. You can't go beyond that. You can't grasp it with your mind anymore. There's a limit to where your mind can get. That's the reason why Aristotle could not conceive that the world had a beginning. And we mentioned that Panzias and Wilson, 1964 Nobel Prize winners, discovered that the universe is expanding and came up with the Big Boom theory, and all science basically reversed course completely and realized that the world had a beginning. And when they bumped their head at the point of the very beginning, trying to figure out what came before, they basically came up with the explanation of the Rambam. This is a point of entropy. Before the Big Boom, the laws of nature as we know them, or don't know them, did not exist. We're like the child on the island. We don't have any capacity to understand, to comprehend, to wrap our mind as it were around what was before. This is not only something which is true in place and time. This is also something which is true, as Rabbeinu says in Torah Chaf Aleph, and that and in Torah Chaf Hey, when there is knowledge which is accumulative, as Rabbeinu says in Torah Chaf Aleph, this is the natural knowledge. People that are more than you, that are above you, are simply people that have accumulated more. They know more things. They can be unreachably more brilliant than you. But basically, it's accumulative. This is a seichel which is called ochar, means backwards. Rabbeinu says there's a whole different realm of knowledge, of seichel, of mental capacity, of understanding, which is beyond the point of entropy. It's above your ceiling. It's a seichel which is called kedem. It's not an understanding that depends on knowing a lot of details and being able to compute that many decisions per second. This is a knowledge that doesn't build up from the ground, but comes down from above. It's not a function of intelligence. It's a function of purity. As Rabbeinu said in Chaf Aleph, the 7 candles. You purify your ears. As Rabbeinu says, Shma divrei chachamim, believe in sages, in chachamim, in tzaddikim. Believe what? Rabbi Nachman in the Bira Likutim, in the 18 rules of learning Likutim Maran, we mentioned that before. He says the perspective of the tzaddik, of somebody who has through that process have gone beyond what for you is the point of entropy, is he's looking at things from a point which is beyond time and place. The Kabbalists teach us that the prophets knew what is going to be 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, or more, because they entered a prophetic state, and they went up in Olam Esalyonim, and in Olam there's no time. Time is measured in asagas. There's a saga that is called a day, and there's a saga in Olam Esalyonim which is called a month, a week, a month, or a year, or 100 years, or 1,000 years. Depends which Olam it is. So 1 hour in Olam Yetzirah is like 100 years in Olam Asiyah. And 1 hour in Olam Abriya is like 1,000 years in Olam Yetzirah, which is like, I don't know how many years in Olam Asiyah, and so forth. So the prophet Yeshayahu, who went up to the Bria, has perceived things. He's already talking about the Geula. He's talking about the redemption. because he was able to perceive things in the level of Bria. That's why when he says that he saw Hashem, and he says, Dmus Adam, Vine Kisa, he is a chair, a throne, Udmus Adam, Valav Dmus Adam, and upon it there is an image of an Adam, of a person. Yecheskel, who was from Yitzira, that's the last prophetic revelation, got only to the level of Yitzira. That's why he's no longer talking about an image of a man, but he's talking about he sees the throne, where's Hashem, and upon the throne is Dmus Kemare Adam, an image in the liking of a person. In other words, in Olam Abriya, Yeshayahu, the prophet Yeshayahu, is experiencing a reflection of the Adam, which is Atzilus, which is Dmus Adam, a reflection of Adam, the way that the Adam of Atzilus is being perceived in Bria. Yecheskel, which is in the Olam Yetzira, he already perceives Dmus Kemarik, Dmus Mari Adam, an image in the liking of a man, a reflection of a reflection. Each time we're talking about a quantum leap beyond the level, beyond the point of entropy, as it were. This is signified in when he's coming to the house of the man of the forest, which represents the tzaddik. He's supposed to go into levels of purity, of sanctity, which were beyond him. In a natural way, in a consecutive way, in a cumulative way, according to his own asagas, there's no way that he can pass. And he says, how can I pass this? The scorpions and snakes represent everything that I did. All the klippas that have attached to me, that are now weighing me down. I'm like going in lead-laden clothes made of wool into water. It pulls me down. How can I ever go there? How can I ever get over this? And the tzaddik says, this is what you're wondering about? How will you get to my house? My house is beyond the point of entropy. It's hovering in midair. And the next sentence he says, he took them over and he got him into his house. It is up to you at this point in time for anybody to remain behind, to remain in the reality that you know. During the night, all the animals scream and shout, and there's huge laughter over the entire world. Nothing fits. You take a look at your life and you're nothing but a quivering bundle of needs and a quivering bundle of inadequacies. And he said, I'm staying here. I'm not going on. to be willing to let go and to realize that the tzaddik is something else entirely. I saw a wonderful zeh in Parshas Miketz when it says that when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. So there's seeming contradiction about what prevented the animals from mauling him. So the Soya says that it is the face of Yosef Atzadik that prevented the animals from harming him. It says because the animals looked at him, and if a person has damaged his covenant, the animals see him as a smaller animal than they are, and you become lunch. But when the animals look at the person who is clean, they realize that they are below you and they're afraid of you. And then the Zohar said, okay, so it's the face, the look of Yosef's face that closed their mouth. But the Zohar said, but just a second, there's there's incongruity over here, because when Nebuchadnezzar asked Daniel, how come the animals didn't harm you? He says, Hashem sent an angel that closed the mouth of the animals. So the Zohar asks, then what is it? Is it the face of Yosef, or is it an angel that came and closed the animal's mouth? The Zohar comes with a startling answer. He says they're both one and the same. The face of the tzaddik, says the Zohar Kodesh, is an angel. The Ramak explains which angel is this. It's the Shekhinah, the entire Shekhinah, which combines in it all the images of every Neshama in Am Yisrael. That's the face of the tzaddik. That's an angel. That's the thing that closed the mouth of the lions, of the animals. You have to take a leap of faith. There's reality way beyond you. There's a tzaddik who is as far from you as the Olam Atzilus is from Olam Asiyah. In between you and where he is a field of snakes and scorpions and a house that is hovering in midair. Are you willing to let go of your story? Are you willing to let go of your cherished resentments? Because there are all kinds of fights that you haven't finished fighting. Are you willing to let go and fly and soar and reclaim your dominion? Or do you want to keep back fighting the fights of Voltaire against the church? I don't know what. That's the point to come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and say, Ribono Shel Olam, I need you. Come to a decision and decide what your next step is going to be. Bezat Hashem, this will do for tonight. I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. Bezat Hashem, on Thursday, we will have our share of Likutei Moharan, Teriotes, which, interestingly enough, deals with how to regain, how to possess, come to possess the face of the tzaddik, this malach.